She said little, only yes or no. He hired her anyway. 5 children needed someone and she needed work. But the past has a way of rising, and one night, lantern in hand, he saw her outside, digging, and something was wrapped in cloth. The letter arrived on a windless morning, carried not by stage or postman, but by a man who left without a name. Isaac Marrow held the sealed paper between calloused fingers, brow furrowed as his children huddled behind him on the porch. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. His mother-in-law had warned him before she died. If he didn't find someone to care for the children, she'd send someone. And that someone had come in the form of a letter pressed into his hand with no return address, only the words, "She'll arrive by week's end. Trust her." It was signed by Ruth, the last person Isaac had truly trusted, and the one who had buried his wife. By Thursday evening, the woman stepped off the westbound coach in a gray shawl and a black bonnet too large for her narrow face. She didn't carry a suitcase, only a single leather satchel pressed close to her ribs. Isaac had expected someone older, perhaps worn with years, but she looked to be no more than 30, though sorrow made her seem older somehow. Her name was Annie Rourke. She introduced herself with only a nod and a soft "Mr. Marrow," then held her silence until the wagon reached the edge of his land. 5 miles beyond town, the Marrow homestead rose between sloped hills and swaying grass, with the cabin standing tall against the coming dusk. She watched it without expression. The children met her with a mix of suspicion and boredom. Will, the oldest at 13, offered a guarded nod. Silas, 11, kept close to his brother's shoulder. Teddy, 9, wouldn't meet her eyes. Miriam, 7, clutched her doll and stared. June, barely 5, stuck 2 fingers in her mouth and refused to speak at all. Annie didn't flinch under their gaze. She crouched low and introduced herself again, voice steady but quiet. Then she stood and walked past Isaac into the cabin like she'd lived there all her life. She didn't speak much that first week. She woke before dawn, had biscuits hot by the time the children stumbled from their beds, and she sang, not loudly but soft, almost like a hum, while sweeping the porch or scrubbing the wash basin. The song had no words, just a low melody that rose and fell like wind through wheat. Isaac wasn't sure what to make of her. She never asked questions, not about his wife who died 6 months earlier, not about the children. Not even when Will came in with blood on his knuckles after fighting with the neighbor's boy. She cleaned the wound in silence, stitched it without comment, then sent him to split wood. Still, something about her unsettled Isaac. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the way she watched the tree line as if expecting something to come out of it. The way she folded June's nightgown each night like she was laying someone to rest. The way she flinched, not visibly but deep in the bones, whenever a door slammed too hard. One night, after the children had gone to bed and the crickets had taken over the silence, Isaac stood by the window and watched her stand motionless at the edge of the yard, just staring into the dark. "You all right?" he asked, stepping onto the porch. She didn't turn. "Yes." "What you looking for?" "Nothing." She turned back then, her face unreadable in the moonlight, "just remembering." He almost asked what, but something about her voice, flat but not cold, kept him from it. Instead, he nodded and went back inside. That night, he couldn't sleep. By the second week, the children had grown used to her. June clung to her skirts. Miriam braided her hair each morning. Silas brought her wildflowers without saying a word. Even Will had begun leaving his boots by the door without being told. Annie kept to her rhythm, her silence becoming something almost sacred, until the day she bled. Isaac found her behind the chicken coop, hunched over, one hand pressed to her side, the other buried in the mud. A crimson stain had soaked through her apron. He called her name, once, then again, and only when he stepped forward did she look up, sweat shining on her brow. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. That's a lot of blood." She stood too fast, wavered, and nearly collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was light, alarmingly so, and fever burned through her skin. Without another word, he carried her inside. The children watched in wide-eyed silence as he laid her on the bed in the spare room and fetched water. She was unconscious by the time he peeled away the bloodied cloth. What he found beneath made his chest tighten. A long, curved wound ran from beneath her ribs down toward her hip, clean but deep, not fresh but not old either, and stitched badly. Someone had already tried to fix her. She slept for 2 days. Isaac kept the children out, fed them, washed them, tried to keep the routine, but his eyes never left the door to the spare room. On the 3rd morning she emerged, pale and slow, but standing. She didn't say a word, just picked up the broom and swept the floor. "You should be resting," he said. "I have work." He stepped in front of her, where the wound come from. She met his eyes. For the first time he saw something behind them, not fear, not sorrow, something older. "I won't bring trouble here," she said. "You have my word." "That's not what I asked." She didn't answer, just moved past him and went outside. That night Isaac found himself watching her again. She stood near the edge of the woods, lantern in hand, eyes fixed on the trees. But this time she didn't just stand. She moved. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to a spot beyond the fence line. He followed at a distance, feet muffled in the grass, heart hammering. She knelt, placed the lantern beside her, and began to dig. The earth was soft from spring rain. Her hands moved with grim purpose, pulling soil free, carving a small pit. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled something out, wrapped in cloth, stained dark. She laid it in the hole and covered it without ceremony. Isaac stepped forward. "What was that?" Annie didn't flinch. She rose slowly, dirt caked to her fingers, and turned to face him. "Something that needed burying," she said quietly. "What was in the cloth?" Her eyes met his. A name. That night Isaac didn't sleep again, and in the morning when he walked to the spot she dug, the ground was smooth. No sign of disruption, no trace of what had been there, just the wind and the hush of trees whispering secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The next few days passed without explanation. Annie said nothing more about what she'd buried, and Isaac didn't ask again. He didn't want to, not because he was afraid of her, but because he wasn't entirely sure what answer he wanted to hear. The children seemed unaware of the late-night burial, though Will eyed him with suspicion once or twice, as if he could tell something had shifted. It had. There was a new tension between Isaac and Annie now, thin as wire but strung tight. She moved through the house as she always had, quietly and with care, but she no longer hummed. No longer sat still in the evenings. She stayed busy even after the children were asleep, folding, sweeping, fixing. And every night, once the oil lamp was dimmed and the house gone silent, Isaac would lie awake and listen for the creak of the back door. Twice he heard it. Once he got up, looked through the window, and saw her standing at the fence line again, this time with nothing in her hands, just her face tilted toward the sky, eyes shut tight, as though praying or listening for something only she could hear. He told himself it didn't matter. Whatever she'd buried, it was gone. It hadn't hurt the children. She was good to them, gentle but firm, never raising her voice. June now followed her like a shadow, always with a ribbon Annie had given her tied neatly in her hair. Teddy, once prone to tantrums, now came when called. Miriam had started leaving her dolls on Annie's pillow when she napped. Even Silas, who rarely spoke to anyone, had been heard laughing near the barn as Annie taught him how to fix the hinge on the stable door. Still, something in Isaac wouldn't rest. One evening after supper, Will approached him as they unloaded fresh feed from the wagon. The boy's voice was low, nearly a whisper. "I saw her with a gun," he said. Isaac straightened. "When?" "2 nights ago. She was in the shed. I wasn't spying. I couldn't sleep. I saw the light, and when I looked out the window she had something laid out. Looked like a revolver, but different. Old." Isaac frowned. Annie never carried a weapon. Not openly. He'd assumed she was the sort who avoided them entirely. But something about Will's voice told him this wasn't the kind of lie a boy his age made up. It was too precise. too careful. Don't tell your siblings, Isaac said, and don't go out there alone. Will nodded, jaw tight. I don't trust her. Isaac almost said I do, but he didn't, because he wasn't sure if he meant it. That night after the children were asleep, he waited until the house was still. Then he lit a lantern, crossed the yard, and opened the shed door. It wasn't locked. Inside, the scent of oil and wood hung thick. Tools lined the back wall, nothing out of place. But near the far end, beneath an old tarp, he found a box, not one he recognized. The hinges were new, the wood sanded smooth. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, lay a pistol, not standard issue, not something common to hunters or ranchers. The barrel was long, hand-engraved, with a pearl grip worn smooth from years of use. And beneath it, folded into a tight square, was a yellowed piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, heart knocking against his ribs. A. Rourke, widow of Sgt. Thomas Rourke, discharged 1872, deceased. The words were brief, cold, factual. Below them, a note handwritten in a different ink. Last seen traveling west, has not been located, assumed missing. Isaac folded the paper back up and stared at the pistol. Whatever she'd buried that night, it wasn't the gun, but she had buried something. And this paper, it wasn't just a discharge or a death notice. It was a search, a military one most likely. But why? He stepped back into the house just before dawn. She was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough with slow, steady hands. She didn't look up when he came in. "You looking for something?" she asked. He froze. "You left the shed door open," she added, still not looking at him. "Next time close it, snakes like corners." He sat across from her. "You going to tell me who you really are?" This time she met his gaze. Her hands didn't stop moving. "I'm Annie Rourke," she said. "Widow, nurse, caretaker of 5 children not my own. That's all you need to know." "I found the pistol." "Did you? And the paper?" She nodded once, as though she'd expected this. "I'm not hiding from the law, if that's what you're thinking, but there are people looking for me, men who wore badges once, not the good kind." "What did you do?" "I survived." The silence stretched. Then she added more softly, "And I made sure someone else didn't." Isaac didn't know what to say. The sun crept over the window, casting thin gold lines across the table. The children began to stir upstairs, footsteps, murmurs, laughter, life creeping forward like it always did. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." "Then don't go looking in places you shouldn't." He nodded. That should have been the end of it. It was. 3 days later, a stranger rode into the yard. He didn't dismount, just sat atop his sorrel gelding, dust-covered and broad-shouldered, with a silver chain hanging from one vest pocket and a revolver riding high on his hip. Isaac stepped out onto the porch, hand resting near the shotgun behind the door. Annie stood beside him. "You Isaac Merrill?" the man asked. "I am." "Name S. Marshall Hodge." He tipped his hat but didn't smile. "Looking for a woman, Annie Rourke, you seen her?" Isaac didn't answer. Annie's posture hadn't changed, but something about her had gone stone still. "She's wanted for questioning," Hodge continued. "There was a killing in New Orleans last year. Her name came up. Figured I'd stop by, see if she passed through." "New Orleans is far from here," Isaac said. "Not that far if you're running." Annie stepped forward then. Her voice was low but calm. "You have a warrant." Hodge's smile was thin. "Don't need one to ask questions." "You've asked." He looked at her, really looked, then said, "You're a quiet one, ain't you?" Annie didn't respond. "Well," he said finally, tipping his hat again, "if you see her, let her know some old friends are looking." He turned the horse and rode off slow, as if waiting for someone to stop him. No one did. When he was gone, Annie exhaled. Isaac turned to her. "Was it you, the killing?" She didn't look at him. "It was self-defense." You sure that Marshall saw it that way? No. Is he coming back? Eventually. Isaac stared after the dust cloud fading in the distance. Then he looked at her. If you have to run, will you take them with you? She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw it, all of it. The loss, the fury, the unbearable tenderness she kept buried beneath her silence. I'd die before I let harm come to them, she said. That night the wind picked up. The lantern flickered on the porch and the trees bent low, whispering secrets. Annie didn't go outside. She stayed with June until the little girl slept. Then she sat by the window, watching the horizon. Isaac didn't sleep either, not because he feared her now, but because he feared what might follow her here and how far he'd be willing to go to stop it. The day after Marshall Hodge left, something changed in the air, not just between Isaac and Annie, but in the very rhythm of the house. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the pause before a storm. The children picked up on it too, though none of them said a word. Even June, usually bright-eyed and curious, seemed more subdued, staying close to Annie's side with her small fingers gripping the hem of her dress like a lifeline. Annie didn't hum. She didn't sing. She watched the trail every evening until the sky went black, and Isaac began sleeping with the shotgun leaned against the wall next to his bed. 2 nights later, Will found the dog. They didn't have one, not since Ruth passed, but one had wandered up from the woods, ribs showing, tail tucked, with fur matted in blood. The sight of it sent all 5 children into a swirl of noise and questions. Will bent beside the animal while Annie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Isaac came quickly when he heard the ruckus. Found it by the fence, Will said. It's breathing but not by much. The dog, a lean black mutt with one ear torn, let out a low whimper but didn't snap or move away. There was something oddly human in the way it looked up at them, like it had run for miles just to collapse in their yard. Looks cut, Isaac muttered, kneeling beside it. Clean, not torn up by an animal. Annie was already walking back inside. She returned moments later with a bowl of water, a piece of cloth, and the steady hands of someone who'd seen worse. It was marked, she said after a long moment. Look at the paw. Isaac turned the paw gently. Etched into the raw skin, burned in with a blade or metal rod, was a crude shape. A crescent maybe, or a claw. What does it mean? Will asked. Annie didn't answer. Her silence said enough. They cleaned the dog's wounds and set it up on the porch with blankets and scraps, but it barely moved. Just watched them with tired, pitiful eyes. That night the wind came from the south. Isaac lay awake long past midnight listening. Not to the wind, not to the creaking of the timbers, but to the sound of the land itself, holding its breath. He rose before dawn, boots crunching frost outside the cabin, and found Annie already at the fence line, arms crossed, shawl tight around her shoulders. He's not working alone, she said without looking at him. Isaac didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He left too quickly, she continued. Didn't press, didn't show a badge. That wasn't a visit, it was a warning. He was telling me he's close, and not alone. Isaac stood beside her. How many? I don't know, but if he brings men, they'll come at night. Not with questions, with fire. Isaac felt a coldness settle in his chest. He'd fought men before, defended his land, his cattle. But this wasn't about land. This was about ghosts Annie had brought with her. And yet, for reasons he didn't understand, he found himself saying, "Then we prepare." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You're not responsible for me." "No," he said, "but I am responsible for them." He nodded toward the house, where the soft light of morning was creeping through the windows. "And they're tied to you now, whether we like it or not." She nodded once. The next 3 days passed in uneasy silence. Isaac began repairing the old barn doors, reinforcing the hinges, adding a brace beam. Annie took stock of what they had: salt, flour, dried beans, some smoked meat, not enough powder. She taught Silas and Teddy how to move quietly in the brush, how to whistle like a jay to signal from a distance. Miriam learned how to boil water for bandages, and Will practiced with the old rifle in the field until his shoulder bruised. Only June was spared. She remained in Annie's care, and the two of them became an inseparable pair. Annie taught her how to sew simple stitches, how to draw birds with charcoal, how to braid tight so the wind wouldn't pull hair loose. And always, June stayed close, as though she knew something none of them could say aloud. On the fourth day, the dog died. It hadn't moved in hours, and when June tried to pet it, its body was already stiff. Annie buried it behind the chicken coop while the children watched in silence. She didn't say a word, but when she returned, Isaac noticed the dried blood on her knuckles. She hadn't worn gloves. That night they heard the first howl. It didn't come from far. Somewhere just past the ridge, carried on the wind, too long and too low to be a coyote. Isaac stepped outside with the shotgun. Annie followed with the lantern. They stood on the porch, eyes scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. The next morning, the crescent mark appeared on the barn door. Burned in, not carved. The children saw it before the adults did. Miriam's scream sent Isaac running. Annie pulled the children back as Isaac doused the mark with water, but the wood still smoked faintly beneath the soot. "How did they get that close?" Isaac asked, voice tight. "They've been close," Annie said. "They were waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For me to settle in, for me to care about something again." That night Annie gave Isaac a folded letter. It was old, the paper soft and smudged. "If anything happens," she said, "burn this." Isaac turned it over in his hands. "What is it?" "Insurance." The next evening, just after sunset, the men came. It started with one horse on the ridge, then two, then five. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They just rode slow and quiet, stopping at the edge of the property like they were sizing up a beast before the kill. The lead rider dismounted. Not Hodge, someone else. Younger, cleaner shaven. A silver pin glinted on his lapel, but no badge. He raised a hand. "Evening." Isaac stepped forward, Annie beside him. The children stayed inside, silent as stone. "You're trespassing," Isaac called out. "Looking for someone," the man replied, his voice light, too smooth for the weight of the moment. "Woman by the name of Annie Rourke. Seen her?" "No one here by that name," Isaac lied. The man grinned. "You sure?" Annie didn't speak. The man took a step forward. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Marrow. We just want to talk to her. She stole something that doesn't belong to her." "She didn't steal anything," Isaac said. "She earned her right to be here." The man tilted his head. "Funny thing, talking like that about someone you barely know." "She saved my children, that's enough." The man's grin faded. "Well then." He turned and remounted his horse. "We'll be back," he said, calm as a prayer, "and next time we won't knock." They rode off without another word. Annie didn't speak for a long time. Finally she whispered, "That was Elijah Care. He worked under my husband. After he died, Care tried to collect debts my husband never owed. When I refused, he came back with fire." Isaac stared at her. "Is that who you killed?" "No, that was his brother." She walked back toward the house. Her shoulders didn't slump. Her hands didn't shake. But Isaac saw it now. The price of survival wasn't just wounds or scars. It was carrying the knowledge that peace was always temporary. Inside, Will was waiting. "Are we going to fight?" he asked. Isaac didn't lie. "Yes." "Will they hurt her?" Isaac's jaw clenched. "They'll try." Will looked at his younger siblings. All of them gathered in the back room, pretending to play cards while glancing at the window every few seconds. "She's not just watching us anymore," he said quietly. "No," Isaac agreed. "She's part of us now." That night Isaac stayed up by the window, shotgun across his lap. Annie didn't sleep either. She sat beside the hearth, sewing something tight and deliberate, her eyes flicking up each time a board creaked. By morning, the horizon was no longer empty. And Isaac knew they weren't coming to knock this time. They were coming to burn it all down. They came before dawn. No warning, no shout, no creak of gate or stomp of boots, just the whoosh of a fire catching fast and hard against the old barn's dry walls and the crash of flames exploding into the sky like a second sun. Isaac was on his feet before he fully woke, shotgun already in hand, and through the thick cabin glass, he saw the blaze bloom and the dark silhouettes of horses pulling back as the fire roared. Someone had set the barn ablaze while they slept. Not a warning this time, a beginning. Annie was already dressed. She emerged from the spare room like she hadn't slept at all, shirt tucked tight, pistol in hand, hair bound back and out of her eyes. She said only one word, children. Will had heard the blast first. He was already herding the younger ones into the back storage pantry, the only room with no outer wall. Go now, he snapped at Silas, who was still barefoot and blinking. Annie crouched by June, wrapped a shawl around her, kissed her forehead. Then she stood again, back straight, face locked. Isaac had never seen anyone move with such cold purpose. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't angry. She was ready. The second fire started on the far edge of the chicken coop. Isaac bolted through the front door without a coat, heat licking his face as he ran to the barn. The flames had fully engulfed the structure, swallowing hay, beams, and roof in violent gusts of smoke. The animals had scattered. He could hear one of the cows bellowing, the sound distant and panicked. He raised the shotgun, but there was no target, just the wind carrying laughter from the ridge, a cruel, echoing sound. Annie stepped out beside him, firing one shot toward the sound. Not a warning, just a message: we're awake and we're not running. The laughter stopped. They'll circle around, Annie said, scanning the trees. They want to scare us out, burn us from the inside. They're not getting in, Isaac said, jaw tight. Then we'll have to take them out. He looked at her. She didn't blink, one at a time, fast, quiet. The fire raged for an hour before it finally collapsed in on itself, a charred skeleton of what had once fed and sheltered every animal they owned. Annie and Isaac stood watch until morning light broke through the trees, faint and gray, revealing a world dusted in ash. The children stayed inside. No one dared step beyond the porch, not even Will. But the real danger wasn't the fire. It was the silence that followed. By mid-morning, they found the horse. It wasn't one of theirs. It stood by the creek, saddle still strapped tight, stirrups dragging, reins torn. No rider, but blood painted the animal's flanks, smeared down to the hoof. It was skittish, ears twitching, eyes rolling. Isaac calmed it with a whisper and a hand on its neck. Annie searched the saddlebag. Inside, she found a map with the Marrow homestead circled in thick black ink, and a letter. Take her alive. Kill the man if you have to. Isaac read it, then burned it. They're camped near, Annie said, scouting us. He sent one man to watch us last night. He's not coming back. Isaac knew what she meant. They found the body half a mile east, face down near a rock, blood dried on his temple, pistol still holstered. No wound on the front, just a crushed skull. Annie didn't explain. Isaac didn't ask. They dragged the body to the ridge, lashed it to a tree, and left a message carved deep into the bark. We see you, come closer. That night Annie taught Will how to aim a pistol properly. Not just pull the trigger, but breathe, focus, pick a spot and make it count. Isaac watched from the porch as she corrected his grip, her voice patient but sharp. Will listened, and when he fired, the bottle on the fence post shattered clean in two. Later, she sat with Miriam and June on the porch swing and told them a story about a bird that lived through 3 storms by building its nest stronger each time. The girls didn't understand the meaning, but Isaac did. Silas began sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Teddy stopped asking questions. On the second night, someone knocked. It wasn't loud, just a soft, casual tap, tap, tap on the cabin door, like a neighbor come to borrow sugar. Isaac froze mid-step. Annie stood from the hearth, pistol already raised. Will moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. Just one man, he whispered. But he's not facing the door, he's turned sideways, waiting. Isaac nodded to Annie. Stay here. He opened the door slow. The man outside wore a preacher's coat, dust-streaked and worn at the cuffs. He smiled as the door opened, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Evenin'," he drawled. "State your business." "Oh, just spreading the word. Folks been whisperin' about Miss Rourke. Terrible rumors. Thought I'd see for myself." "She's not here," Isaac said. The man raised an eyebrow. "No. Not anymore." The man shifted just slightly. It was enough. Annie's voice rang out from behind the door. "Next time you knock, bring scripture." Then the window shattered. A rock smashed through the glass, followed by a bottle, a wick already lit, fire flickering like a tongue. Isaac dove as the Molotov burst against the floorboards, flames licking the walls. Will screamed. Teddy pulled June down. Annie kicked over the basin of washwater she'd kept ready, smothering most of the fire in seconds. But the cabin was filled with smoke. "Out the back," Isaac yelled. "We'll get the others." The preacher was already gone, vanished into the woods like a shadow. They ran. Isaac carried June. Annie covered the rear. They didn't stop until they reached the root cellar, hidden behind a thicket of brush down near the old creek bed. It had been Ruth's idea, years ago, when she still feared war returning to the frontier. Now it was their only haven. They crouched in the dark, breath loud, hearts louder. "They're going to torch the house," Annie said. Isaac nodded. "We'll rebuild." Will's eyes burned with rage. "We have to stop them." "We will," Annie said, "but not by charging blind." She reached into her coat and pulled something from a hidden pocket, a metal cylinder, no longer than her palm. Isaac recognized it instantly. "Dynamite." "You kept that?" he asked. 3 sticks, enough to send a message." "Jesus, Annie. They started this." Silence. Then Will said, "What do we do?" Annie looked around the cellar. Her eyes found each face: Isaac, the children, the ones who'd come to trust her not as a stranger but as something else, something closer. "We don't run," she said. "We make them regret thinking we would." At midnight, Annie disappeared. Isaac hadn't seen her leave. One moment she was sitting beside June, humming again for the first time in days. The next, she was gone. He found the note left in her coat pocket. "Trust me, keep them safe." He didn't sleep. When dawn came, so did the explosion. It echoed across the valley like a thunderclap, shattering birds from the trees. Isaac bolted up from the cellar's stone floor and ran outside, shotgun raised. In the distance, across the ridge where they'd seen the riders before, smoke curled into the sky. She hadn't waited for the attack. She'd brought the fight to them. Isaac didn't wait. He ran. Up the ridge, across the thawed path where snow had given way to spring mud, his boots slick with frost and dew. The shotgun bounced against his shoulder, his breath coming hard as he crested the rise, and then stopped dead. Below him, the grove was in ruins. The explosion had split through the trees like a bolt of lightning, ripping a crater into the clearing where the horses had been tied and the men had made camp. One tent remained upright, torn and blackened. Smoke coiled around the wreckage like it hadn't decided whether to rise or retreat. 2 men lay motionless. A third was screaming, not words, just pain. His leg was mangled beneath a fallen log, his rifle bent in half beside him. There was no sign of Annie. Not until the 4th man staggered from the trees, coughing, blood on his chin. He had a pistol in his hand, but no strength in his arm, and before he could raise it, a figure emerged from behind him, fast and soundless. Annie moved like a ghost, knife in hand, eyes flat. Isaac had seen fights before, bar fights, cattle rustler brawls, 2 men wrestling in the dust over a spilled drink or a crooked game. This wasn't that. This was surgical. Annie struck once. The man dropped. She stood over him for 3 seconds, long enough to make sure he stayed down, then turned, already scanning for more. Isaac stepped forward from the tree line. She didn't flinch. You weren't supposed to follow. I figured. You left the kids alone. Will's watching them. He's more like you than me. Annie sheathed the knife. There were 6 men, 4 are down. 2. Hiding, watching, waiting to see if I die first. Isaac cocked the shotgun. Then let's disappoint them. They didn't have to wait long. The 5th man stepped into view from behind a black pine. He had a long rifle, military issue, his face pale but determined. Drop it, he said. Both of you. Annie didn't even blink. You're too far. I'll hit one of you. Then pick which one you want to haunt you. He hesitated, just a second, but it was enough. Isaac swung the shotgun up and fired. The man cried out, staggered back, and disappeared behind the tree. Whether the shot hit him or not, neither waited to check. Annie grabbed Isaac's sleeve and pulled him toward the downed horses. We need to go, she said. They'll follow. I'm counting on it. They cut through the trees, breath sharp, dodging roots and limbs. They didn't speak again until they reached the hollow near the creek, where Annie paused to listen. Then she crouched low and scratched something into the dirt, an old trail sign, one Isaac hadn't seen since the war. This isn't your first time hunting men, he said quietly. She looked at him. It's not hunting, it's ending a chase. By the time they made it back to the cabin, the sun had risen enough to paint the snowmelt in gold. We'll open the root cellar as soon as they whistled. They came near, he said, didn't see us, but I heard one say they'd circle back. Annie turned to Isaac. It's time. For what? She knelt in the dirt and began unrolling a waxed canvas pouch she'd carried since the first day she arrived. Inside were 3 small metal cylinders, wires, and a narrow box of matches. Isaac stared. You said you only had 3 sticks. I do, she said. This is the 4th for the house. No. She looked up at him. If we're going to make a stand, they need to think we're done, burned out, gone. Isaac shook his head. Not the house. She didn't argue, just rolled the canvas back up and stood. Instead, they set traps. Not crude ones, real ones, tripwires beneath brush, oil mixed with lye on the steps of the smokehouse, a line of crushed glass scattered beneath the rear fence. Annie moved like she'd done it all before. She had. Isaac no longer questioned how or why. He just watched, learned. By noon, the 5th man stumbled into view. He was hurt, limping, clothes torn and streaked with mud. The others weren't with him. Either they'd died in the blast or run when the plan failed. He raised his hands as he neared the porch. I don't want trouble, he croaked. They left me. I didn't sign up for this. Annie stood in the doorway, pistol at her side. You came to kill me, she said. I was paid to track you, that's it. I didn't shoot no one. I didn't light no fire. Isaac looked at her. She stared at the man for a long moment, then said, Drop your belt. Leave your rifle. He did. She nodded toward the horizon. Walk until your legs stop working. He did that too. That night they slept in shifts. The children slept in the cellar again, but this time none of them asked why. None of them cried. They understood now. Even June. Isaac took the first shift. He sat on the porch, shotgun across his knees, the wind hissing through the bare branches. Annie joined him halfway through the night, silent as always. He handed her the gun. Think that was the last of them? No, she said. Elijah Kerr doesn't send scouts. He sends men to die and then he comes himself. You sure he's still out there? Yes. Isaac leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You said your husband worked with him. Thomas. He was Kerr's commanding officer in the territories. They ran recon for the U.S. before the war broke out. Afterward, Kerr didn't let go of the power. He turned outlaw. No, she said, He turned official. Isaac stared at her. Care owns a company now, private contracts, recovery work, collection, mercenaries with papers that say they're legal. She turned her face to the night. Thomas found out they were killing witnesses, not just threats. He tried to report it. What happened? He got shot in the back on a hunting trip. Isaac didn't speak. Annie continued. They called it an accident, sent me his boots, that's all. I tried to report it myself. A week later, my house burned down, so I disappeared. Took what I had, buried what I couldn't carry. Isaac's eyes narrowed. That's what I saw that night behind the cabin. A ledger, she said, and a photo, Thomas with Care, signed orders, duplicates. I couldn't risk anyone finding them, not even you. He nodded slowly. What happens if we survive this? He asked. She looked at him then, really looked. I keep running. And if you stayed? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Just before dawn, the sky split with thunder, not from above but from the tree line. The final storm had come. They came without horses this time. 6 men, 1 in front, the rest spread wide like wolves. Elijah Care walked with slow, certain steps, a long coat dragging through the brush, silver chain swinging from his vest. His face was calm, clean, almost bored. I know you're here, he called. Isaac stood tall on the porch. The children were already hidden. Annie crouched behind the front wall, rifle ready. They agreed, wait for his order, wait for a clean shot. Care stopped 10 feet from the gate. You're the man who took her in. I admire that, really. She has a way of convincing people she's the victim. She buried her husband, her home, and every trace of herself just to keep your name off a paper, Isaac said. If that makes her a liar, maybe you're the one who should have died in the woods. Care smiled. You talk like a man with nothing to lose. Isaac didn't smile back. You talk like a man who's forgotten what losing looks like. Then he gave the signal. The traps went first. Glass shattered beneath the fence line. One man cried out, falling forward into the tripwire. Oil slicked his boots and he slipped hard. The smokehouse trap burst with a gust of flame, sending another man howling into the brush. Isaac fired. Annie fired. One man dropped. Another stumbled. Care ducked behind a tree, cursing. It wasn't a gunfight, it was a war. And it didn't last long. In the end, Care stood alone, blood on his sleeve, rage twisting his face. He stepped from behind the tree with a pistol drawn and aimed at the porch. You think you've won? He shouted. Then Annie stepped into view. No, she said, but I know you've lost. Care raised the gun. She didn't flinch. And from the side Will appeared, rifle steady, breath held, and pulled the trigger. Care jerked once, twice. Then dropped. No one spoke for a long time. Annie walked to the body, checked for breath, found none. She knelt not to grieve, not to gloat. Just to make sure it was over. Then she looked back at the children, at Isaac, at the place where she'd nearly buried every part of herself. And for the first time since arriving, she smiled. It wasn't relief. It was the beginning of something new. The snow melted for good that week, not in drifts or slow thaw like winters past, but in great sheets that slipped off the eaves and soaked deep into the dirt, revealing patches of green so sudden and vibrant they looked out of place in a world that had only known gray and ash for months. The trees began to bud. A hawk nested high above the ridge, and for the first time in what felt like years, the valley was still. Not silent, not hollow, still. They buried the bodies behind the eastern fence, not out of mercy but necessity. Isaac didn't want them near the root cellar or the barn, and Annie insisted they not waste too many hours digging for men who would have left their corpses to rot in plain view. Will helped with the shoveling. Silas hauled stones to mark the graves, not with names but with symbols, simple carvings meant to ward off curiosity, just in case. No one spoke much about what happened. Teddy drew it instead. His sketches filled 3 pages, crude outlines of men with rifles, trees burning, horses fleeing across jagged lines that looked like smoke or wind or both. But on the 4th page he drew something else. Annie, standing in front of the cabin, arms crossed, the sun coming up behind her like a crown. The likeness wasn't perfect, but the stance was unmistakable, unshaken, permanent. Isaac found the drawing one morning, left on the table, and didn't say a word. He just folded it and slid it into his coat pocket. Annie never saw it. If she had, she wouldn't have known what to say anyway. Because the truth was, she didn't feel permanent, not yet, not even close. In the days after Care's death, she moved slower, more deliberately. She still rose before sunrise, still did her share and more. But there was something in her silence that had changed. Less guarded, more tired. She stayed out by the barn longer than needed, patching holes that didn't matter and sorting tools that hadn't been used since Ruth died. When Isaac offered help, she nodded. When the children asked questions, she answered kindly. But her eyes always drifted east, toward whatever came next. On the 4th night, Isaac found her out behind the cabin again. She wasn't burying anything this time, just sitting. Her back against a post, her hands loose in her lap, staring at the sky like it might offer her some answer she hadn't found yet. "I figured you'd left," he said gently. "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" She didn't look at him, "Because I didn't want to." He stepped closer, sat beside her in the grass. "You told me once that you run when it gets quiet." "I did." "What changed?" She turned toward him finally, her face half-shadowed in moonlight. "The quiet doesn't scare me anymore. The leaving does." They didn't touch. They didn't lean in. They just sat there, breathing the same cold night air, and let that be enough. The next morning the girls made pancakes from what little flour remained. June insisted on picking wild berries for the top, even though most were still tart and small. Miriam found one ripe one and split it between them. Annie smiled when she bit into it. It wasn't good, but it was real. Tangy, stubborn, a taste earned. Will took to cleaning the rifle like a ritual. Every night he sat on the porch with oil and cloth in concentration that bordered on reverence. He didn't say much about what happened, not about Care, not about the shot he took. He just worked in silence, and Annie let him. "He needs time," she told Isaac once. "I know. But not too much." Isaac raised a brow. "You worried about him?" "I'm worried if he doesn't talk soon, the quiet will harden." Isaac nodded slowly, "Like it did to you." Annie didn't deny it. So that night she sat beside Will on the steps, watched his hands work, and told him a story about her brother. How he used to carve animals out of driftwood, each one with a flaw, a broken ear, a missing paw, so they'd feel more real. She told Will that no good thing ever came perfect, and that sometimes the best things were the ones that survived being broken. Will didn't answer. But the next night, he handed her the cleaned rifle instead of putting it away. And she knew what it meant. Still, the threat hadn't vanished. Even with Care dead, even with the men gone, Annie stayed alert. She checked the trails daily, eyes always scanning the trees, fingers grazing the pistol on her belt even when she was planting new seeds with the girls. The map she'd found in the scout's saddlebag stayed tucked under a floorboard. She studied it every evening, memorizing roads and rivers, escape routes, safe valleys, just in case. "You think they'll come?" Isaac asked her one morning as she scanned the western ridge. "Maybe not for me," she said, "but for the records, the ones I buried. If Care was working under contract, someone else gave the order, and that someone might not care who they burned to keep it quiet." Isaac didn't answer. He just looked toward the barn, where June was feeding a lamb from a bottle, and Miriam was singing softly under her breath. "What do we do?" he asked. "We keep building," she said. "Even if it burns again." She met his eyes, especially then. Spring grew stronger. Chicks hatched. The creek swelled. The new calf stood for the first time and took 2 steps before collapsing into a puddle of mud, legs too long, head too big. Silas laughed so hard he startled the sheep. They rebuilt the barn, not fully, just enough to hold what was needed. They cleaned the root cellar, planted new rows. And then one morning, a rider came. He wasn't dressed like Care's men. He wore a blue coat, dusted with travel, and bore a badge, U.S. Marshal, faintly tarnished. He dismounted without arrogance, without rush, just a tired man on a long road. Isaac met him by the gate. "Marshal," he said cautiously. "Marrow. I came looking for a woman named Annie Rourke, widow, traveled west last fall." Isaac didn't move. "She here?" the marshal asked. Annie stepped out from the barn. Their eyes met, not with fear, not with recognition, with something closer to defiance. "You're not here to arrest me," she said. "You're here to clean up what Care left behind." The marshal didn't flinch. "I'm here to ask questions, not take sides." She nodded slowly, then asked. They spoke on the porch out of earshot. Isaac stayed close, not to interfere but to witness. Will stood nearby, rifle slung over his shoulder just in case. The girls peeked through the windows. Silas stood by the root cellar, knife tucked at his hip like a badge of his own. The marshal listened more than he spoke. When Annie told him about Thomas, about the fire, the papers, the men, he didn't argue. He took notes. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a telegram. "They're trying to scrub the whole thing," he said. "Care's name, his company, official word says he never worked for the government." "He didn't," Annie replied. "He worked for power." "Same thing sometimes." When he left, he tipped his hat not to Isaac but to the children, then to Annie. "You were right to bury the past," he said, "but if you ever want to dig it up, my door's open." Annie didn't answer, but her eyes softened just a little. That night, Isaac found her behind the cabin again. Not burying, not hiding. Just sitting, the grass soft beneath her, the stars burning bright above. "You think it's really over?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I think it's quiet enough to plant something." "What would you plant?" "A life," she said softly, "one that lasts." He sat beside her, the silence wrapping around them like a worn quilt. And when she leaned into him just enough to let her shoulder brush his, he didn't speak, didn't ask, just breathed in and out. Together, not strangers, not protectors, something more. The letter came folded 5 times, sealed in cracked wax and tucked into the hands of a stage driver who didn't know its weight. He handed it off to Isaac with a shrug, said something about real official types down south, then rode on without waiting for a reply. Isaac stared at the name scrawled across the front, his name in a hand he didn't recognize, and felt his chest tighten. It wasn't the letter that scared him. It was what it might unearth. He didn't open it, not right away. Instead, he tucked it into the top drawer of Ruth's old desk, the one Annie had taken to organizing in the early evenings. She didn't ask about the letter, just noticed it when she was dusting and left it where she found it. They both understood that sometimes answers needed time to be faced. The next few days bloomed warmer than expected. Tulips pushed through the cold soil by the front gate. June strung a ribbon around one and called it her birthday flower, even though she'd been born in late autumn. Miriam helped Annie sew new curtains for the kitchen, and Will finally smiled, truly smiled, when Silas caught a trout barehanded from the creek. It wriggled and slapped him hard across the face. The laughter that followed rang like wind chimes, sharp and full and real. The children had stopped asking when Annie would leave. So had Isaac. That evening, as they all sat on the porch, eating cornbread and stew, a flicker of motion on the horizon caught Isaac's eye. He stood slowly, narrowing his gaze toward the road. Another rider. But this one wasn't alone. 2 wagons, 5 horses, a procession more than a visit. Dust billowed behind them in wide clouds. Whoever they were, they'd come prepared. Annie rose beside him, slow and careful. Her face didn't show fear, only a quiet steel that had become second nature. Isaac could feel the tension rise in her like heat off sun-baked stone. Back inside, she murmured to the children. They obeyed without protest, slipping behind the screen door, quiet as shadows. The wagons rolled to a stop 20 feet from the porch. The man in front dismounted first, young, too well-dressed, his coat buttoned high and stiff, his boots polished clean. A city man, government or close to it. He didn't offer a name, just glanced at Isaac, then Annie. "Ms. Rourke," he said, "we've come for the documents." Annie didn't move. "Which documents?" "You know which." She looked past him at the wagons. "How many of you are armed?" "That doesn't matter." "It does to me." The man cleared his throat. "We're not here to make a scene. We just need to retrieve what was taken from Care's possession. You give it over, we leave. Simple." Isaac stepped forward, jaw tight. "And if she does?" The man sighed like he pitied their ignorance. "Then we wait." "Wait for what?" He smiled without warmth. "For someone less patient than me." Annie stared at him for a long moment, then turned without a word and went back inside. The man didn't follow, just stepped back to his wagon and leaned against it like someone who knew how to bide time. His men did the same. They made camp 20 yards from the cabin, lit a fire, and cooked dinner like they belonged there, like they could outlast whatever resistance Annie had left. She didn't come back out that night. The letter sat unopened on the desk. Isaac didn't sleep. Neither did Will. The next morning the sun rose hard and bright, turning the dew into steam. Annie stood at the gate before dawn, rifle slung across her back, sleeves rolled, face set. The man tried to speak again, but she cut him off. "You don't get to camp on my land." "This isn't your land," he said evenly. "It's registered under a dead woman's name. No one else claimed the title." Annie stepped closer. "You think that gives you power?" "I think it gives me a window. You hand over what you've hidden, and we all move on." She shook her head slowly. "That's not what happens. If I give you the ledger, you burn it. You erase what Care did. You call it settled. But that doesn't fix what he took from me or from the others." The man's jaw ticked. "There are no others." "There will be." He exhaled sharply. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Annie's voice dropped. "You haven't seen hard yet." For 2 days they stayed. 2 days of slow work, unspoken rules. The children weren't allowed past the porch. Will stayed armed. Annie kept her distance. And on the third night, a storm rolled in. Not like before. Not snow, not thunder. Just hard, drenching rain that turned the earth to soup and turned the tension to something sharp enough to cut skin. That's when Annie opened the letter. Isaac watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, back rigid. She read it once, then again. Her hands shook, but her face didn't change. "What is it?" he asked. She folded it, set it gently on the table. "My husband wrote it," she said. Isaac frowned. "I thought." "He wrote it before he died, gave it to someone he trusted, told them to mail it if anything ever happened to him." Isaac stepped forward. "What's it say?" Annie met his eyes. "It says the ledger was only half the truth. There's a second set of files, names, transactions, orders with signatures, the kind that don't just implicate Care, they expose everything." "Where are they?" She looked past him out the window, toward the small grove beyond the ridge. "Buried," she said, "but not by me." Isaac felt it then, that twist of fate, the gut-deep certainty that their storm wasn't over. Not yet. "You going to dig it up?" he asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, under cover of darkness, they rode out. Annie, Isaac, and Will. They left the others with Miriam in charge. The girl had grown in quiet ways, stronger, surer. She didn't flinch when Annie handed her the pistol, just nodded and said, "We'll be safe." The ride to the grove was slow, silent. Rain still fell, soft now, misting their clothes. Annie led them through a break in the trees to a flat patch of land beneath an old elm. She knelt, hands pressing into the earth. "It's here," she whispered. Isaac and Will took up shovels. The ground gave easily, soft from weeks of thaw, inch by inch, foot by foot, until the blade struck wood. A box, narrow, sealed. Annie opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were folders, dozens, each marked with dates, locations, signatures, a map stained with blood, and at the bottom a small wooden horse, one of Thomas's carvings. She held it like it was glass. "They'll come," she said softly, "once they know this is real." Isaac didn't blink. "Let them." They rode back before dawn. The man was still there, waiting by the fire. His boots were muddy now, his coat no longer perfect, but his eyes lit up when he saw Annie return. "You've changed your mind," he said. "No," she said, "you have." He stood. "What's that mean?" "It means you'll deliver a message." She held out one of the folders. "Take it back," she said. "Tell whoever sent you that the rest will follow, when I'm ready, when the time is right. If they want to play games, I'll play louder." He didn't reach for the folder. Isaac stepped forward. "Or don't, but if you stay another night, we'll consider it an attack." The man weighed them both, then the children watching through the windows, then the fire he no longer controlled, and he took the folder. They left by noon. Wagons rolling fast this time, no posturing, no promises, just retreat. Annie didn't relax, but she let out a breath that felt like months had been trapped behind it. Later that night, when the children were asleep, she sat beside Isaac on the porch. The air was thick with the smell of earth and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a fox cried once, then was silent. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "I don't know how to stop fighting." He looked at her gently. "Then don't, just fight for something different." She leaned into him. "I think I already am." And beneath the floorboards the truth waited, buried not to be hidden, but to grow. Tomorrow they'd decide how to use it. Tomorrow they'd write a different kind of ending. Dawn came gentle. No riders, no threats, just stillness. Annie rose before the others, stepped onto the porch barefoot, and watched light stretch across the fields. Isaac joined her, quiet. "They're gone," he said. "For now. They'll think twice before coming again." Annie said nothing, but her shoulders eased slightly. Inside, the children began to stir, Teddy and June first, then Silas and Miriam, and finally Will, already slipping on boots to tend the animals. The danger had passed, but it had changed them all. Later, Annie spread a map on the table, marked it with charcoal. "This ridge here," she said, tapping a spot, "that's where the rest of the records are going." Isaac frowned. "Not here." "Here, S for children. That ridge is for fire." That afternoon Isaac and Will rode east, 3 days through thawing woods and wind-swept plains. They reached a cabin tucked between hills. A woman answered the door, sharp-eyed. "No nonsense." Annie handed over the documents. "No names," she said. "Fair," the woman replied. "Give me a week, they'll burn." They returned home before frost touched the windows. June tackled Annie with a squeal, Miriam held up a loaf she baked, and even Silas grinned wide. Isaac laughed. Will patted the lamb he'd named Ruthie. For the first time, peace felt possible. That night under the stars, Annie sat on the porch. Isaac joined her. "They asked if you'd stay," he said. "Said it wouldn't feel like home if you left." Annie looked at her hands. "I'm not good at staying." "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to choose." She did. Weeks passed. The ledgers did their job. The world learned what care had done. Names once hidden were spoken aloud. Annie's name stayed buried. She de-earned that much. One evening, Will asked her, "Did you ever bury anything behind the cabin again?" Annie smiled, "Just seeds." "What kind?" "The kind that grow." And they did.